Erev Tov, a lot, Boker Tov, Boise, and summer greetings to everybody in between. We have an exciting program for you today, coming to you literally live from the Galilee. This is our Friends Indeed series continuing in the summer. We know you can't hop on a plane right now and go visit the Sea of Galilee, but we're going to do our best to bring it to you today with some photos and with some sounds and with everything we can do to help you feel like it's a memory or it's a dream for the future that you can get back to. We're here with our friend, the renowned tour guide, Reuven Solomon, who knows the magical, mystical, and majestic Galilee like nobody else. It's actually the place where he lives. He's going to share some of his favorite sites, both from his many different tours and just literally from outside the window where he lives. He has guided numerous AIFL delegations and alumni from around the country. A few of them are actually on your screen today, and we'll ask some questions from their own perspectives. We're excited actually to be joined today by two of our alumni from a delegation that we sent in 2016, Janet Four and Anita Scoop, who were on the school superintendents and senior administrators. So this is technically summer break for the both of you. But we know you're working hard to figure out how we're going to have school in the fall. But we promise it's a Sunday, it's the Galilee. We're going to give you a little bit of a break. We also have one of our student interns with us, Rishi, who's joining us as well from New Jersey. And we hope that this will be a little bit of a break for you as well. We appreciate your being here with our other interns this summer. So we're excited to begin today for everyone who's on this call, whether you're on Zoom or you're on Facebook. We want you to use your chat function now and tell us your favorite place in the Galilee, someplace that you visited. Maybe it's a restaurant, maybe it's a dip in the Sea of Galilee, maybe it's one of the religious sites that you're going to get to see today, an art gallery maybe you purchased a trinket or an art piece that's beloved in your home today. Maybe you can even send us a picture if you want, or post it. We'll do our best to share with other people as well. My home is definitely includes a collection of memory sakes from our family, which lived in Western Galilee for a period and has many warm memories that we hope to rekindle today. So for anyone joining us live today, you can ask us questions. You can pretend or imagine yourself on this tour with us by asking questions. So if you're on Facebook, you can host a live Facebook watch party. And also afterwards, our favorite question, yes, we will absolutely send you the link, and you can send it to your friends and you can watch it again. And if you miss half the episode, you could turn it back on later as well. So thanks for being with us. We're going to jump right in now with Reuven. Reuven, I know the Galilee is a favorite for you. We're not going to try to cover everything. You have two favorite spots that are the focus today of your guide. But with all the places you could have lived, you've toured everywhere in Israel. You chose the Galilee as a place where you sit now. Obviously, it's special to you. You want to give us just an insight as to why you chose this region to live in as well as touring?
Most certainly. I live in a little, it started as a gated community, and now it's an open community. Very close to, in between Nahariya and Carmiel. Beautiful weather, lovely views, scenery, and open space all around. And this was especially important in the lockdowns that happened earlier in the period, where here you could go out and walk for an hour and not run into a single person.
Well, there are people who have already called in, Noreen, who actually lives in Carmiel. There are people who have visited what they called the Dude Ranch and horseback riding back in 1969. So you have lots of repeat customers here, people who have fond memories let's see, Naria, remote, Moshav, remote, a lot of different familiar places from the region where people have been that I think will all come alive today during your tour. So why don't we go ahead and jump in, Reuven?
Wonderful. First and foremost, it's a real pleasure to be with you again. Today, I'm going to stop at 2 sites along the Sea of Galilee. There are so many and they're hard to choose which ones, but these are 2 of my favorite sites. We're going to start with a tour of the Mount of Beatitudes. You know, one curious thing about this Mount of Beatitudes is that it is listed as amongst the very lowest of the summits of the world. That sounds a little like an oxymoron. How can a summit be the lowest of the summits of the world? Well, the reason is that the Mount of Beatitudes is actually some 80 feet below sea level. It rises some 600 feet above the Sea of Galilee that lies below it, and thus it is listed as one of the lowest summits of the world, but it's a very, very special summit. First of all, I would like to show you where it is in Israel, and then we'll talk about what makes it so special. In the next slide, you will see how that green triangle marks the spot of the Mount of Beatitudes that, as I said, is some good 600 feet above the lake below, the Sea of Tiberias, and you can see by that red circle on the left-hand map where in Israel it is situated. What makes this mount so special? And I'd like to give you a little bit of perhaps historic background here.
Reuven, can you speak a little bit closer to the microphone?
Is this better now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, excellent. What I'd like to do now is to give you a little bit of the historic context of why this site is so important and such a special site. According to most traditions, in fact, I would say almost all traditions, this is where Jesus goes up to a cave to rest after perhaps the feeding of the multitude by the shores of the Sea of Galilee. And then he is followed up by a large crowd who want more. They don't want more food, they want more teaching. And here Jesus speaks his best known sermon that we call the Sermon on the Mount. Now, Antonio Baluzzi, the brilliant Italian architect, builds a Byzantine-style church over the cave where the Byzantines themselves actually had a commemorative site. And the oldest tradition we have of the oldest record we have of this being pinpointed as the site where Jesus speaks his most famous sermon is from Egera or Ethera, who is the Spanish, I suppose you could call her, nun, the holy woman, who comes in 380 AD, of course, to visit the holy sites in Israel. And she writes, she was here for 3 years and she writes tremendous volumes. And she writes of how by the site that you see on the map in front of you, Tabcha, where the 2 major events in Christianity take place, the feeding of the 5,000 with 2 fishes and 5 loaves, and also right beside it, on very almost adjacent to it, also called Tabcha, where Jesus appears before the disciples for the first time after the crucifixion in the Galilee. And she talks about how she goes up from there. It was a climb, some 600 feet of climb, to a grassy knoll where Jesus speaks his best known sermon. And that's the oldest historic recording of how this site was commemorated some 300 years after the events. Antonio Baluzzi, and in the next slide you will see, builds a Byzantine church style, which is very special. First of all, he builds it in 8-sided octagon, with each one of the sides, when we go inside the church, you will see, marking one of the 8 Beatitudes. But what makes this chapel church extra special is that along with the 2 concentric circles, the inner one holding up the dome and the outer one holding up the 8 sides of the alcove, he builds a veranda around the entire construction, where one can walk outside of the church and get a 360 view of the Sea of Galilee and the mountains of the Galilee on the entrance side. Now, we're going to take, before we hear this most well-known, the best-known sermon of Jesus, we're going to take a little look inside the church, and after that, you'll hear the sermon. The scenery, as I said, from the veranda, and not only from the veranda, but also from inside the church, gives some spectacular views of the Sea of Galilee, as you can see. And as we sweep around, we'll have an overview of the church. You can see what I meant by 2 concentric circles, the dome and the 8-sided church around it, and then the veranda around it all. One of the 8 sides, of course, is the main entrance. And once we're inside the church, you will see, of course, the central part of the church, the altar. You'll get another view of the altar in a moment. And the altar is directly under the golden dome above it. As we look up at the golden dome, you will notice that there are 2 sets of windows, one for light in the dome itself, and the other one directly underneath each one of those allowing light in windows, one of the 8 Beatitudes. And here another beautiful view of the golden dome with the 8 windows in the dome and underneath the dome, marking the Beatitudes. But in addition to that, in the next slide, you shall see that on each side of this octagon, 7 sides, because the one side is taken up by the doorway, are these windows at view level, where inside the church you get some beautiful views of the entire surroundings of the Sea of Galilee. This church was built, as I said, by Antonio Bellucci in the 1930s, and one can ask, how did he know what a Byzantine church looked like? Well, he always had the floor plans, because that's in archaeology. But you need more than floor plans to build a church. And for this, we have dozens of mosaics that the Byzantines left behind in Israel, in Jordan, in Turkey, of churches that they built. And when you got the mosaic picture that fit the floor plan, eureka, you've got the church. We will continue now to hear the sermon, and after that I'll have a few words to say. As we hear the sermon, you will see some views of the surroundings of the Sea of Galilee and the church itself. And we will also get another look inside the church, a video look inside the church with the dome and everything else.
Chapter 5. And seeing the multitudes, he went up into a mountain. And when he was set, his disciples came unto him. And he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so persecuted they the prophets which were before you. Ye are the salt of the earth. But if the salt have lost his savour, wherewith shall it be salted? It is thenceforth good for nothing, but to be cast out, and to be trodden under foot of men. Ye are the light of the world. A city that is set on an hill cannot be hid. Neither do men light a candle, and put it under a bushel, but on a candlestick, and it giveth light unto all that are in the house. Let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works, and glorify your Father which is in heaven. Think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law, till all be fulfilled. Whosoever therefore shall break one of these least commandments, and shall teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven.
So you heard just a small portion you just heard a small portion. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, excellent, because I can't see it.
Speak a little closer, though, Reuven.
Sure. You just heard the first part of Matthew 5, the Sermon on the Mount. And I would like to say a few words about some of the teachings there that if you were familiar with the way language was used in the time of Jesus, it would mean even more. For instance, the very blessed are. Jesus, of course, didn't say blessed are. He used the Hebrew Aramaic, ashrei, which is a much richer word than blessed. It is a multi-meaning word, full of enrichment. Enriched in spirit, enriched in material, enriched in every way, and enriched in joy and happiness. In fact, the amount of Beatitudes in Hebrew is called Har HaOsher, the mount of joy or the mount of happiness. But Ashrei is the word that Jesus would have used for the 8 Beatitudes. Now, salt losing its saltiness. One can scratch one's head and say, how can salt lose its saltiness? If you knew how they salted in those times, then it would make such perfect sense. And what Jesus was telling the people, they could picture very clearly. Because in those days, they didn't have fine grain supermarket salt in shakers. They gathered salt with all its impurities and sewed it in a linen bag that would work as a filter, that would act as a filter. And this linen bag would be dipped into whatever they were salting. Eventually, of course, all the salt crystals would be dissolved, and all one would be left with is a bag of washed out earth. Guess what they paved pavements with in those days? Washed out earth that would be trampled and stamped to create a hard surface where you wanted pavement. And ye are the salt of the earth. To the people he was addressing, we know that salt is a preservative and it gives flavor to life. But salt that has lost its saltiness really is trampled underfoot. You know, I must say that another one of the teachings that he speaks of that day is his clarification that he has not come to destroy the law or to throw out the law. Of course, the word he would have used would be Torah, the Jewish law. And as a Jew, I must admit that I like that. That the law is not going to be tossed away, but built upon. And this sort of takes us actually to our next stop, which is pointed out by Jesus, perhaps actually physically pointing to it when he talks about a city set on a hill. And, you know, before, as we go through these final slides, before you will see this city on a hill that can't be hidden, in the time of Jesus, it was very clearly visible. Today, you have to poke between the trees and the convent that is built blocking the view. But from the Mount of Beatitudes, one can imagine Jesus pointing to a hill, the city on a hill that cannot be hid. And that's the city we're going to be visiting next.
Reuven, before you jump in Tzfat, maybe a couple of questions that have come up about the first stop. There was a question from Dina about how long the full Sermon on the Mount was meant to be. I know you just played a short excerpt from that to give a feel. Do you have a sense of how long it is?
Yes, it goes the entire length almost of Matthew 5. And it's quite a long sermon and a wonderful teaching that talks about various aspects of behavior in life. We just got the first, how would I say, concentrated part of it that we call the Beatitudes, the 8 blessed hours, or the 8 Ashrei.
Now, there are many different Christian sites, obviously on the Sea of Galilee, and as a result, I know when Christian tour groups in particular are traveling in that area, it's an area that's very full of tourists. I was with a group in February. I understand that right now that's not exactly the situation because of COVID. Were you traveling down there recently in that area as well?
I was there. I specifically went to the sites a couple of weeks ago, and it's sad to say that since there are no tourists, and it's mainly tourists who come to these sites because they're sort of, they don't have a permanent congregation, these churches. These churches are used mainly by tourists who celebrate Mass and Eucharist and everything else and come to visit these holy sites. And since there are no tourists, they're all shut. Every single last one of them is shut, and we're just waiting for them to open up again and waiting for you guys to come and see this in person and not virtually.
Well, I'll give a moment in a second to see. I don't know if Anita, did I see your hand? Were you gesturing? No, you were just waving. Okay. So there was a comment in here actually from Barbara earlier that said she broke her foot when they got to the Galilee. So just so you know, Reuven, you're doing a real mitzvah here by sharing for those not only who actually made it to Israel, but didn't get to view the Sea of Galilee. One of the questions that came in is, what does the word beatitude mean?
That was the closest, I would say. Beatitude actually means a blessing, blessed are, and hence that's the closest translation that they had from the Hebrew, Aramaic to the Greek, and from the Greek to our language, and that is Beatitudes. We would actually call Beatitudes Ashirenu, enrichment for all.
Very nice. And there are questions about, obviously, Reuven, when you tour, you've brought many Christian groups to these Christian sites. There's a question about whether religious Jews go into the churches and are allowed to tour them. Have you taken Jewish groups to some of these Christian sites?
Yes, I have. Many Jewish groups. Not all very Orthodox Jews will go into churches, but most of them will. I mean, if you're talking about the ultra-Orthodox, then no. But if you're talking about practicing Orthodox Jews, I have taken many into the important Christian sites like the Holy Sepulchre and some of the churches around the shores of the Sea of Galilee.
Well, certainly nobody can have any objections to our virtual tour today. So continue on. And
especially with the part of not coming to throw out the Torah. So
no, we will not do that today. Go ahead. Tell us about what
we're heading now to.
Where we're headed
to Tzfat. Tzfat can be spelt in so many different ways, and I like the Tzfat spelling because that's the closest alliteration to the way it's supposed to sound. Otherwise, you could call it Safed or Zfat or all sorts of strange names, but the name of the site is Tzfat. And it probably comes from the Hebrew tzfu, a lookout, because it's set on a hill, and it is certainly the highest city, incidentally, in all of Israel, or in all of Israel proper. Before the Golan Heights came into our hands, Tzfat was the highest point in Israel, some 3,000 feet above sea level, and hence the name Lookout. It's a city that was inhabited from the time of the temples all the way through to today, with many people in Tzfat can count back so many generations. And the ruins in Tzfat, in the Jewish quarter, of house upon house and basement upon basement. Those of you who've actually toured there know what I'm talking about, that you can actually go down the slopes of the hill as you go down to the different levels of the same house or houses that were built one on top of the other. We can start going through the slides, and what I want to do with you in Tzfat is to, first of all, give you a little bit of a taste of the city, and secondly, talk about Tzfat and its connection with Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah. Tzfat becomes the capital of Kabbalah, we call it in Israel, since, I would say, the 15th century, where Kabbalistic rabbis from the Spanish expulsion make their way to Tzfat, and they choose Tzfat because of its proximity to Mount Meron, where, and here you see where Tzfat is, in the northern part of Israel. And they choose Tzfat because the neighbor of Tzfat is a hill called Mount Meron, where Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is interred, and he is thought to be the author of the Zohar, which is actually the first book of Kabbalah. And hence, Kabbalists in the 1500s swarm from the Spanish exile into Tzfat and make it the capital of Kabbalah. You're looking at, you can identify very clearly to the right-hand side of the Judith Gallery, a minaret of a mosque. You're looking at where the Arab quarter was, and I say was, because there was very serious fighting in Tzfat. Tzfat was going to remain by all plans within Israel for the Jewish population. That was according to the partition plan. But the Brits pulled out of Tzfat way before the pull-out of the rest of Palestine, and thus Tzfat fell into terrible battles. There were some at the outset of this war. There was always a Jewish population. Here you're seeing the entrance to the Jewish quarter of Tzfat across from the Muslim quarter. And here some very, very furious fighting took place, which ended up with the Palmach managing to conquer the city and to hold it the Arab residents vacated Tzfat, and today there are some Arabs and Muslims and Christian Arabs living in the area, coming back to the area to study in the medical schools in Tzfat and so on. But immediately after the War of Independence, it was totally Jewish. Now, I want to take you through some of the ancient alleyways of Tzfat that'll give you a taste of this mystic and beautiful city. You'll notice the colors of blue and white everywhere. And as we tour around through some of the lanes, I want you to meet some of the people in Tzfat. Here is a lane on the way to one of the synagogues we're going to be coming back to visit the AbuHav synagogue. And there are really some beautiful corners, as you can see, and beautiful alleyways and lanes that are ancient. But remember, there were two very serious earthquakes in Tzfat, one in 1759 and the other in 1837, that caused a lot of death and a lot of destruction, but not total destruction. And we'll talk about the buildings that managed to remain standing, and we'll point out the ones that didn't. But everywhere you look, the foundations are original, and the building on top, in many cases, was rebuilt in the 1700s, and then again after the second earthquake in the early 1800s. You meet some of the people of Tzfat on our next slides, and as we walk into one of these major alleyways of the galleries all the way through to the synagogues, Avi will treat you to some frozen lemonade mint, and in season, of course, pomegranate juice. Across from Avi is Eliyahu, who has his little stand where he shows off something very specific to Tzfat, and that's micro calligraphy. This is pictures made up of entire books of the Bible, and like this one, the Passover Haggadah, the story of Passover, in a picture, in a very, very miniature Hebrew writing that makes up the picture. Of course, inside his little stall, he has books of the Bible with beautiful pictures made up of every word from the Bible, actually making up the picture. So micro calligraphy, a Tzfat speciality. There's a lot of very special Kabbalistic art in addition to the microcalligraphy, of course. But right at the top of the lane, you will meet the Yemenite pizza place. This is a special Yemenite dish, lahun, that is very delicious. And we have these mystic Yemenites putting it together for you if you get hungry on your touring. What we're going to be doing now is to tour 3 synagogues. And this is the first of the 3 synagogues and houses that we're going to be touring. This is the Rabbi Yosef Karo house and synagogue. And this is one of the buildings that stood all the way through the destruction, the 2 earthquakes. Rabbi Karo's house wasn't destroyed by the earthquake, and the synagogue was a little rebuilt and fortified, as you will see, strengthened. But this is the house itself, when the video starts, that we're going to take you in through the courtyard of, and then into the synagogue of Rabbi Yosef Karo, who was actually born in Toledo, Spain, and comes to Tzfat in his 50s, and he lives a long and very prolific life, writing one of the most important works in modern day Judaism today, called Shulchan Aruch, that becomes, if you like, the handbook of Jewish behavioral law, HaAlacha. And it is all done in this modest little, when we get into the courtyard, this modest little home that is still standing today, not destroyed by the earthquake. after we see the very short video, we're going to be actually looking at some slides within the synagogue itself. And I'll talk a little more about that as we head into the synagogue after this video, the house of Rabbi Yosef Karo. Inside the synagogue itself, the first thing you're going to notice, of course, is the very beautiful Torah Ark, where the scrolls are kept. And some of the scrolls are very old. Not as old as the Dead Sea Scrolls, of course, but we're talking about scrolls from the 1600s, kept in the Torah Ark. And sometimes you can actually get the caretaker there to open up and show you the scrolls. You'll notice the thickness of the walls of the synagogue. You'll notice the color scheme and the seating, very Spanish style, Sephardic, family style, seating around. And the thickness of the walls, of course, to withstand earthquake, and this might explain why much of this building survived where others did not. There's one very unusual aspect. Here's another view of the ark, but there's one very unusual aspect of the synagogue, and that is the Gnizah. The Gnizah literally is a hiding place. And usually it's kept under the bima or hidden somewhere. But here in this synagogue, it is actually kept in a glass cabinet within these thick walls. And, a Gnizah is where the holy books and writings are kept because they're no longer useful they're damaged and they're no longer used anymore. But you cannot dispose of them wrapping up the fish bones and tossing them out in the garbage. These are holy documents. So they are actually kept and hidden, and to meddle with them would be like meddling with the dead. So it's totally forbidden. When it makes its way into the Gnizah, its next stop will be given a proper kosher burial, just as Rabbi Yosef Karo was buried here in the ancient cemetery of Tzfat. It's very rare to see the tomb not surrounded by people who have come to pay their respects after all these years to the author of one of the major guidebooks of Judaism, Shulchan Aruch, which means the set table, which is today the handbook of Jewish behavioral law. Many others, of course, are buried in this cemetery, and we'll talk about them. The next synagogue we're going to be visiting, and this is a video as well, is the AbuHav synagogue. AbuHav never left Toledo, Spain, but his students and disciples did. And here I get a chance to start to talk about where this idea of Kabbalah can lead. The students of AbuHav knew that he loved his synagogue in Toledo, Spain, and Kabbalah legend has it that they brought it over. His synagogue in Toledo, Spain was transported to Tzfat in Israel, but not by being taken apart, put on a ship and shipped over, but by power of belief and prayer. The Kabbalists believe that this synagogue was transported by will of mind and prayer of the righteous who brought it all the way from Toledo, Spain to Tzfat. It's a very special and beautiful synagogue. Also, as you can see, very Sephardic, Spanish in style, with seating in family fashion around a beautiful bima. That's the raised platform where the Torah scrolls are read from. And here I get a chance to talk a little bit about some of the elements here in the slides that will follow. It's a very unusual synagogue. Look, 3 arcs. And these 3 arcs are in the only surviving wall of the synagogue from the 1500s. All the rest of the synagogue collapsed. There's a great legend that after the earthquake, and I'm talking about the first earthquake here in the 1700s. After this earthquake, 10 men come to retrieve the scrolls, amongst them in the central ark, the scroll that AbuHav was thought to himself had added to, a very old scroll that is to this day used. It's not taken out every holiday, but at least once a year, it's actually read from. And that's where it's placed, in the central ark. But it's very unusual to have 3 arks. So what do they do with these 3 arks? The left-hand one are for the rest of the writings, the books, and so on. And the right-hand one are for the Quran. Because in the time of the Turks, and from the time the synagogue was built right up until the Brits take over in 1917, the Turks are in charge, and it was Turkish law that a synagogue would also have to have a Quran. And the story goes that that Quran was kept in the 3rd ark to the right. There are lots of stories and legends about the AbuHav synagogue, but I want to concentrate on 3 pictures that you're going to see shortly. This is a beautiful bima, of course. There's another story about how this synagogue actually reminds one of a song that we sing in Passover, Achat mi yodea, one who knows. And there are elements in the synagogue that mark each one of these one who knows. One dome for one God. 2, the tablets of the 10 Commandments for the 2 stairways up on the bima. And 3 for the 3 arcs, and 4 for the pillars that hold up the dome, the matriarchs, and so on and so forth, that go all the way through to the 12 sons of Jacob. And here I want to talk about, as we see the rest of the slides, 3 paintings. We'll stop by each one of them. The first one you're seeing in front of you now. And I want to talk about these because one gets a sense of where and what this Kabbalistic belief actually, shows its symptoms. In this first painting, what you're seeing in the center, of course, is Rachel's tomb. It looks very different today because they've built all around it like a fortress, but this is the way it looked for centuries. And in fact, when I first came to Israel, this is the way it still looked. On the left-hand side, you see a corner of the Hebron, where the patriarchs are buried. On the right-hand side, Absalom's monument in Jerusalem. But look above, in the center, and you're looking at the doves of peace, very, very separated, far from each other. And in between them, a sort of troubled waters, if you like, with a boat and people in the boat, and black figures, and sort of not good. And this may be an allusion to a reference to the Holocaust and the Holocaust survivors escaping this troubled time. And now we go to the next picture, where the tomb, where you'll see above, at the top of the picture, the golden dome of the Rock, and of course below it, the Western Wall. And look, there are Jews by the Western Wall. After a long, long time, after hundreds of years, centuries, Jews are once again by the Western Wall. The doves of peace are a little closer together, but not quite meeting yet. Now, in the third picture, you're going to understand perhaps the the whole idea of this prayer, if you like, Kabbalistic prayer of, you'll notice the doves have met underneath David's harp, the tomb of Rachel, who incidentally is one of our 4 matriarchs. I'm sorry, 1 second. That's telling me I have to hurry up. One of our 4 matriarchs, but she is seen allegorically as the mother of all the sons and thus the tribes of Israel. And if you like, in a way, allegorically, Rachel, our matriarch, is like Mother Earth. And the doves here have kissed, met together, and the quote below it, Bakol barama nishma Rachel mechaka el banea. And this is a quote from, and I'd like to read you just very quickly, the Jewish Bible. Thus says the Lord to Rachel, keep thy voice from weeping and thy eyes from tears. For thy work shall be rewarded, said the Lord. And they shall come back again from the land of the enemy, and there is hope for thy future, said the Lord, and thy children shall come back again to their own border. This is from Jeremiah, after, before and during the Babylonian destruction and dispersal and the exile of the Jews. And this series of paintings, if you like, is a sort of a Kabbalistic prayer.
Reuven, we have quite a few questions asking about cemeteries and yes, graves of famous people in the area. Someone just asked where the tomb of Rachel is.
Excellent. That's an easy one to answer. On the way, you have to pass it when you go from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. When you go to the Church of the Nativity from Jerusalem in Bethlehem, you pass by Rachel's tomb. It is actually on the other side of or right on the what we call the separation line between areas A and areas B and C.
All right, well, then we'll hold on that question because we're actually doing a program on Bethlehem actually on Wednesday. So there's an opportunity to explore that even further. Now, earlier, actually, there was a question, Reuven, about whether there are the cemeteries actually have underground burial, because there are lots to see in Tzfat. And there was a specific question that I had not seen before, even though one of my daughters was born in Tzfat, about a famous Jewish pirate who's buried in Tzfat. Yaakov Coriel, is that a story or a name that's familiar to you?
No, you stumped me here. You're going to send me to research now.
Okay, so Gil Zohar claims that there is a famous pirate of the Caribbean who came and became a mystic that landed in Tzfat to sort of repent from his sins. And we'll have to check on that. I had not heard this story as well either.
I'll check it out.
But tell us about the famous cemeteries that the famous graves and that are in the old cemetery.
Well, what you referred to is asked by many people because they see these high tombs above ground, and they conclude that the body is actually above ground. That's not the case. The reason for the raised slabs sometimes is that they can't get very deep into bedrock, but the reason is mainly to create a monument. Because in many, still today, not all of course, but in many still today, there is a, it's not a law, but a sort of an acceptance that there should not be a standing plaque or memorial. It should be low and on the ground. But if you want a little bit of presence, then you build it up a little bit, and that's why even on the Mount of Olives you'll see most of the graves not flat on the ground but raised above.
Interesting. So Reuven, before I let you finish up on the tour, I wanted to give a couple of our virtual tour participants an opportunity to just share a couple of their stories. There have been so many coming through about trips to the Galilee. Maybe Janet, share a favorite memory of if you would.
Sure. That was only one stop on our trip, and I would say what I recall was having come out of Jerusalem at that time and traveled over that way. It was very hot, and I remember the Sea of Galilee being very refreshing. literally a breath of fresh air. So having been raised up in Sunday school, I had these pictures of it in my mind of what the Sea of Galilee looked like. And I think I truly envisioned a sea or an ocean, which it was not. And so that was kind of an eye-opener for me. But we had the opportunity to actually, our guide obviously gave us a tour of what the Sea of Galilee was and what it looked like. And we had the opportunity to get our feet in. We have some wonderful pictures of getting our feet into the Sea of Galilee, imagining Jesus and the disciples out on the boat. And then we ate St. Peter's fish, or tilapia, at the restaurant there, which was a wonderful memory. And I tell people, once you've had St. Peter's fish in Israel, you will never eat American farm tilapia again. It was absolutely phenomenal. And then, Anita, I don't recall, but I think after that we did head up to the Mount of Beatitudes, and we were able to go into the church. I have some pictures of Anita on the veranda, and it was lovely. And again, you can imagine Jesus sitting on top of that hill, looking over the Sea of Galilee and the mountains, and having those, groups and hordes of people just coming up and listening. And it is such a beautiful, inspirational setting.
Thanks. Thank you, Janet. I appreciate, I know you said you shared that with your family, and I appreciate your sharing it with the group. Anita, from your perspective in Staten Island, where you normally are. I know you're not there now, but what was your sort of highlight from the trip?
So one of the things that I remember, and I hope I'm getting this right, was there was a path to the church of the Beatitudes. And along the path, this beautiful garden path, were these little stones, each with a beatitude. And they were so beautiful. It was such a beautiful walk with the flowers and the sunlight. And it really had a very holy feeling. It was just lovely.
Well, thanks for sharing that. There were a couple of notes in here about a very famous boat that was raised, that's actually in a museum. Dr. Armarant asked about that, maybe a 2,000-year-old boat. Reuven, can you share some background on that?
Most certainly. The boat is still on display in the museum in Kibbutz Ginasar. It's a 2,000-year-old boat. We don't know whose it is, but it was on the water. It's a Galilee fishing boat. And it was on the water, and this is carbon-14 dating proved. At the time, Jesus and the disciples were fishing and preaching on the same waters and around the same waters. So, sorry, this boat would have been on the water at the time. It was probably sunk in the marine battle with the Romans in 65 AD, actually. And only discovered in modern times, and is in view for everyone today. One of the tidbits about this boat is the findings in and around the boat, dating to the time of the ministry of Jesus and the disciples, and upon investigation and checking, it's a beautifully made boat. That is made by tongue and pinion method, and not just planks nailed onto ribs. But the fascinating thing is that there are exactly 12 different types of wood used to make this boat. Well,
the chat group is just going crazy here with all of the different interests and references, both to the boat and to the Jewish pirates. Marion tells us that there is a definitive, what she calls a must-read for the summer, called Jewish Pirates of the Caribbean by Edward Chrysler. So, and there's something here about pirates who kept Shabbos. So apparently there are some people that are following this very, very closely. So I do want to get you back, Reuven, to your last few slides, but I'm excited. I can't help but ask you about one of my favorite encounters in Tzfat is that, as you called Tzfat the capital of mysticism. It's also the capital of klezmer, some people claim.
Yes.
And the klezmer festival at nighttime brings those streets that you showed all those pictures alive. Can you just share a little bit about the soul of Tzfat? I feel like it's a place that has created, artists come, musicians come, and people of many faiths come and are able to experience it in a way that's very different than perhaps other cities in Israel and around the world.
It is a very special city. There are special times to visit, of course, in the Klezmer Spiel, when it comes alive everywhere. But one of my favorite times to actually walk around Tzfat is on the eve of Sabbaths, of Shabbat. It's very mystic and very, very beautiful feeling. In fact, I don't know if we're going to have time or not. If we do, I'll be really happy. But the last synagogue I was going to take you to, just show us
a photo while you're talking. This will have to be our closing segment.
HaAri Synagogue. HaAri Synagogue is it's a video, and it is actually the one that for me is the best way to try to explain Kabbalah. HaAri is actually an acronym. It's an acronym for Rabbi Yitzhak Lurie, in Hebrew, Ari, which also means a lion, and his disciple students, call them what you will, call themselves Kurei HaAri, his cubs. HaAri was and is to this day the last of the great Kabbalists, and in fact there's a Lurianic Kabbalist movement. The video is terrible because I had to take it through an open window. The synagogue was shut, and this is what we could see. But the painted wooden work there that you see is the decoration of the ark, and in the middle of it is a very unusual for a synagogue, a lion, and the lion has a human face, and the human face, very unusual for a synagogue. Some people say is an imagination of Moses, but others say is an image of HaAri. HaAri is very special because in two events, he gives us a real insight into what this Kabbalah business is all about. And this is in a synagogue above the cemetery that the last slide will show you when we get there, but in a cemetery where he is also buried, is where on one Shabbat, he calls to read from the Torah King David, King Solomon, and Elijah the prophet. And each of them, after their reading, disappear into the crowd. That's how much power his students put in the man. But on one Shabbat Eve, on one Friday, by overlooking the beautiful greenery and the hills of Mount Meron, HaAri says to his students, they're all dressed in their white gowns, ready to receive the Sabbath bride, a song that was written incidentally in Tzfat in those days, Lecha Dodi, receiving the Sabbath bride, when he says to his students, gentlemen, let us receive the Sabbath today in Jerusalem. They look at each other and they say, what's happened to the rabbi? He's drunk too much Shabbat wine already? Or he's knocked his head on the doorpost? We'll never get to Jerusalem in time. And when one raises his hand and says, Rabbi, perhaps we should tell our wives or pack a sandwich, he says to them, woe betide us. It is because of your lack of belief and prayer that we are still standing here and not in Jerusalem to receive the Sabbath. For if you all would have said and believed and prayed that we will receive the Sabbath in Jerusalem, we would be there. This is, if you like, the crux of Kabbalah. Mind over matter, with the proper holiness. You can move a synagogue from Toledo, Spain to Tzfat, and you can transport yourself from Tzfat to Jerusalem, and you can bring the Messiah.
Reuven, thanks for taking us to this special place today. It's each episode, each month that you do reminds us of such wonderful memories and such wonderful connections and context. And there have been lots of people multitasking during this who have really, you've really reignited those memories and very fond experiences. We've got more coming. Reuven is taking us in August to Akko. This entire summer, our Friends and Deeds program will continue with all kinds of different activities. Next week, we'll take you to Renana for theater, from English theater that'll take place. We have an episode coming up from wine that will feature wines from both Israel and from California. And even this coming week, as I mentioned earlier, we'll be going to Bethlehem and meeting with a Jewish and Christian clergy team who are really trying to help the people of Bethlehem during this very difficult period when no tourists are coming. So you all have done your job today. You've revisited with us as virtual tourists. We hope you enjoyed it. At America-Israel Friendship League, all of you are friends of Israel, and we appreciate your being with us and building this virtual community. So thanks to everyone. Have a safe and enjoyable week. We look forward to continued programming throughout the summer. All the best.
Shalom, shalom, and we'll see you next month.